There is a good argument to be made that Iran is right now in a stronger position than it was at the beginning of the war, particularly with it now knows it has ability to inflict severe economic pain on the U.S. and the rest of the globe by closing the Strait of Hormuz, which they can do at any time, it would appear, even if it now reopens in the wake of this deal. So what's the latest you've heard as to this? And we should note, President Trump is so obviously desperate to get out of this war. He continues to overpromise. This is like the third or fourth time, or 10th time, or 15th time, where he said the war is at its close. But Iran gets a vote, and we have not heard from Tehran yet that they've agreed to these conditions.
Right. So, Jonathan, it appears now this is actually just an extension of the ceasefire. I think when we use the word deal, that seems to indicate there's some kind of finality to it, and it doesn't look that way. But, yesterday on social media, you saw this kind of apocalyptic meltdown from those who are supporting the war and those who are in the Republican Party. And clearly, President Trump and his allies are pushing back right now. But I think the way to frame this is to take a look at or just ask several kind of key fundamental questions. First and foremost would be, is Iran, has their nuclear ambitions been thwarted? And the answer to this right now looks to be no. Think about their conventional military capabilities. Were they hit hard by the U.S. military? Of course they were. But do they still have ballistic missiles and drones? And the answer is yes. What about our allies in the region? Well, the Israelis are upset with us, and certainly the Saudis now are looking at other regional arrangements. So even our allies are not happy about how this has turned out. And then finally, what about the Iranian people? Don't forget back on January 13th, Trump made that famous statement, help is on its way. The Iranian people are no closer to political and economic freedoms. And in fact, a deal which would provide economic lifeline, sanctions relief to the regime answers that question quite clearly. Perhaps the regime hardliners are more firmly entrenched. So if you ask those fundamental questions, you see why there is pushback from a lot of people.
So, Robert, your latest piece for The Atlantic is titled Trump's Endgame is Surrender. And you write in part this: the outlines of President Trump's endgame in the Iran war are now emerging. Endgame, in this case, is a euphemism for surrender. Trump's repeated threats to resume attacks have proved to be bluffs. The leaders in Tehran have been calculating for 2 months that Trump would not launch another attack. And for that reason, they have made no concessions, despite the damage they suffered from 37 days of relentless strikes. Trump no doubt hopes that he can slip away without Americans noticing the magnitude of this defeat. Most likely, the new normal in the Persian Gulf will be chronic instability and frequent disruptions in shipping. That's what happens when the hegemon cedes hegemony. So, Robert, this is a great piece. You've written a few things in recent days that have really gained a lot of traction in foreign policy circles and the broader national discussion. Talk to us more, if you will, as to why you view this as a surrender, Trump not meeting the aims of this conflict. And I was really struck by your line, I just read it, about how Trump is going to probably claim a quick victory and then never talk about this again because he's so desperate to convince the American people that this actually wasn't a humiliating defeat.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, first of all, Trump has been making it clear he's been desperate to get out of this war for over 2 months. I mean, this war, from Trump's point of view, effectively ended on March 18th when Iran, striking back after a strike on their oil field, hit a major gas facility in Qatar, at which point Trump ordered the Israelis and the Americans to stop hitting Iran's energy targets, and basically has been afraid of resuming the war and escalating ever since. He's bluffed numerous times about doing something which apparently Americans have found persuasive, but the Iranians have not. And that's the key thing. The Iranians believe that Trump has been bluffing. They know how desperate he is to get out of this war, which gives them total leverage. And they therefore do not need to make any concessions at all. And they haven't made any concessions. And one reason, I think the reason why Trump doesn't have a deal right now is the Iranians have not even remotely agreed to all the things that Trump claims that they have. And so at the end of the day, Iran is going to wind up in control of the Strait. That is going to be a fundamental geopolitical shift in the region and in the world.
I want to stay in the region, Richard, because we heard Mark mention the Saudis, the Israelis, the reactions that they're having. In Robert's great piece, he mentions that a U.S. official described Netanyahu's reaction to this potential memo of understanding as his hair being on fire. And it's certainly not the first time that we've heard reports of private disagreements between Netanyahu and Trump on what the path forward with Iran should look like. So I wonder if you can just bring us inside the region into the ripple effects of this potential deal and what it might mean for our allies there.
Yeah, there's three big sets of losers that are local. One Mark just referred to, which is the Iranian people. The fact that we're now giving money to Iran or talking about it essentially unconditionally really helps the people who are running that country, who are no friend of ourselves or their own people. Second of all, Israel. Israel's an enormous loser here. Even though there was close tactical coordination with the United States throughout this war, the fact that virtually none of their priorities, ballistic missiles, drones, support for proxies is part of any of these conversations, leaves Israel arguably worse off, because there's also going to be a ceasefire that ties its hand. Iran is going to be allowed some nuclear capability or potential down the road. So this is not going to, quote unquote, end the Iranian nuclear threat. Plus the U.S.-Israeli relationship, I think, is in worse shape as a result of this war. And then last but not least of the local countries, what we're going to see is the United States is going to basically hightail it out of here as soon as it can. And they're going to be left somewhat vulnerable against an Iran that has learned what it can do about the Strait, has a threat and the ability to attack their energy and water infrastructure. We're not in a position to defend these countries. So they're going to have to essentially find new arrangements or cut new deals. And the real danger, obviously, is they think about appeasing Iran, or some of them may, I think the idea that we have opened up, and I'd be curious what Bob thinks, the idea that the Saudis and others one day say, hey, the only way we can deal with Iran, if we can't count on the Americans, is we've got to think about nuclear weapons. That what we have done in some ways has sown the seeds of an even more dangerous Middle East. Bob?
Robert.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry, just nodding in complete agreement with everything Richard just said. And I do think that you should not underestimate what a disaster this is for Israel. And I know Richard is not, but let me just add that because Iran is going to control who gets in and out of the Strait, and we've got to stop talking about reopening the Strait. The Strait's going to be open under new management, and the management is going to be the Iranian military. They're going to control who gets in and goes out. They've made it very clear, by the way, that they do not intend to allow vessels from countries that they regard as hostile to have any access at all, which means they're going to have leverage over every nation in the world, which means further that if Israel feels itself threatened by what Hezbollah is doing in Lebanon or what Hamas is doing in Gaza, and therefore they feel the need to strike at them to protect themselves, they're going to find that Iran then has the capacity to punish them by choking off access to the Strait of Hormuz and therefore forcing other countries in the world to put pressure on Israel. Israel is going to find itself more isolated in this world than it has ever been before, and including, as Richard says, in the United States, where there is now as soon as Trump turns his back on Israel, which he has to do in order to get out of this war, at that point, I think MAGA will follow him, and Israel is going to find itself with very few friends in the United States.
Pablo, in Robert's defense, I often find myself transfixed in agreement with Richard Haass, just helplessly nodding.
Yes. His Knicks takes have long hypnotized me. But Mark, I'm thinking, okay, it is worth re-stressing that Iran didn't have control of the Strait of Hormuz like this pre-war, and now they do. So enormous. And so now I'm wondering, okay, so this administration, how are they going to change the American perspective on what a disaster this was? And the name that comes to mind is Cuba. And I'm wondering how you process the idea of another military operation, a distraction in this hand, sort of taking us away from the Strait of Hormuz on the other.
So, Pablo, in my circles, the former intelligence officers, Cuba is actually something we talk about all the time because it's clear the administration has, telegraphed their interest in some type of regime change. But you also saw, as we talk signal versus noise, the signal is as follows. The CIA director, John Ratcliffe, made a visit to Havana. He actually took with him some of the individuals who were involved on the Maduro raid in Venezuela as a very specific sign. You see us putting secondary sanctions on the Cuban regime. So the economic squeeze is there. The real question a lot of us have, of course, is are we actually going to kind of get involved in yet a third military escapade? There was Venezuela, Iran. Are we really going to go into Cuba now with any type of military force? You have an aircraft carrier parked in the region, but it's a U.S. military that has expended a lot of ordnance. We do hear reports that, Southern Command is putting plans together, but I would be very surprised if there's any type of military activity. The economic squeeze, sure. But for a candidate who ran on no more wars, never-ending wars platform, are we really going to go to this hat trick of Venezuela, Iran, and Cuba? That's going to be something the American people, I think, really do rebel against.